Now, we always talk about fine margins and little percentages, don't we? And I think this little percentage is not a little percentage, it's a massive percentage.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the big things people talk about is, what is the most important thing in carp fishing? And they'll talk about location, timing, things like that, and time you spend on the bank. But the reality is, you can do all that, but the most important thing in carp fishing is the thing that goes in the carp's mouth, the hook. If you can't get that hook in the carp's mouth and it continues to stay in the carp's mouth, you're not going to catch them. And the analogy is, I draw to Formula One. You can have the best form, and everyone watches Formula One. All they talk about now is tyre management. It doesn't matter how good your car is, if your car is not putting the power to the ground through the tyres, it makes no difference at all. So if next year Ferrari say, I'm sorry Lewis, we've got your brilliant car, but because of your salary we're having to cut back a bit, so we've got you on remolds. It's not gonna work. The same with carp fishing is, you can spend all the money on buzzers, the best bivvies, the best bait, you can be there. If the hook is not right, because your hook is your tyre, the tyre patch, the contact. It's the contact that goes in the carp's mouth. So hooks, to me, are in reality the bit that you always have to get right, and they're often the cheapest bit.
Yeah.
Compared to a rod, they're so affordable. I mean, the hooks are like 50p to a pound, and that is the contact part.
Well, we were talking about it earlier, weren't we? And we said that a lot of people use the hook time and time again after a fish, and they don't check the hook point. So obviously, if it's kinked over a little bit, it's going to defeat the object of that hook trying to go in the fish's mouth. But like you said, Jules, compared to a rod, line, bite alarms, bait, it is the cheapest thing that we need most precision on, really, isn't it?
There's three areas I want to cover, and that's barbed, barbless, or sharpening. If your water is barbless, the equation is taken out of your hands, isn't there? I would prefer, if the water allowed it, and if it says you can't use a barb, I would prefer to crush a barb and have that little bump. But a lot of waters are specific, and they say not crush barb, barbless. If it's barbless, that's the way it is. And I understand why many fishery owners do insist on barbless hooks. A barbless hook is more likely to fall out. And if you've got inexperienced anglers, you want that rig which they might not have used strong enough line, they might have fished too close to snags, they might have walked. I understand why waters do insist on barbless hooks. Not my favourite, but I prefer barbed hooks. Barbed hooks the barbs used to be horrible. They used to be big old barbs. I really think we shouldn't talk about barbs, because really now it's either microbarbed or barbless. I prefer microbarbs. The little microbarb keeps the hook in.
Yeah.
So I think 95% of all carp hooks now are probably 99% are microbarbed.
Microbarbed, yeah.
So I always prefer a microbarbed hook. We then go on to sharpened. Now, I have seen many profile carp anglers say that a sharpened hook does not make a difference. There's very things that black and white in carp fishing, and they're arguable. I do not think it is arguable that a sharpened hook will prick more carp than an unsharpened hook. I don't think that's an arguable point. I'm not saying that you have to use them all the time. I'm not saying that they'll land more fish. The finer the point, the more fish you will prick. Again, watch any of the underwater videos. The carp they're not looking at baits and ignoring them most of the time. They're taking them in, moving, and the hook's falling out. The hook generally is in the carp's mouth. The finer the hook point, the more chance that hook has of finding flesh. Back in the olden days, again, slipping into dad mode here, in winter you went to smaller hooks. We all thought the carp couldn't see them as well, didn't feel them as much. The reality was that a smaller hook was a finer hook. The finer hook would prick carp. I think those carp in winter were mouthing 6s, 4s, 5s, but weren't hooking themselves because the hooks were thicker. When you used an 8, a 10 or a 12, it was such a fine hook that it was pricking the carp and going in the flesh. The finer the point, the more chance you will have hooking the fish. Now, most hooks nowadays are sharp. In fact, I would say all hooks are sharp.
Out of the packet.
Out of the packet.
Yeah.
Hooks are sharp. When we talk about sharpened hooks, we're really talking about fined down point hooks. It's sharpened. All hooks are sharp. The point of every hook is always sharp, generally, but the pressure that you need to pull that hook in, the thinner the point, the finer it is, the more it'll go in with less pressure. And if you don't believe me, just get a baiting needle, a fine baiting needle, and push it against your flesh. Then get a disgorger and push it against the flesh.
Yeah.
That disgorger will never pierce your flesh, but that fine pointed baiting needle will. So the finer the point on a hook, the more chance it will go into the flesh. Now, you can do it yourself, or you can go and get sharpened hooks. I know that Corda do their own range of sharpened hooks.
Yeah.
And I think there are some firms that do hand sharpened hooks. I personally send mine to Rig It Tackle. I've tried to sharpen hooks. There's things I'm good at, and there's things that I'm not great at. And if somebody can do a better job for me, I'll send it to. So Rig It Tackle. And the difference between I started using find rig sharp. I mean, right.
Yeah.
There's no pressure on that.
I'm going to say straight away then, I don't think you need to prick that as quick as you
I
did.
didn't prick it. That is just, look, that is the difference. That's straight out. You are not going to get that.
Yeah.
That is the difference between a fish hooked or pricked and a fish not. So Rig It Tackle do it for me. They find, I mean, if you are good enough and you are prepared to, get your hook and find them down. But what I've found is it's one of them jobs that my time can be spent. It's like rolling baits. I can roll my own bait, but I'd rather somebody did it for me.
Yeah.
Somebody does a better job for me. The most important thing, though, of all these is the eyepiece. I mean, I've not got bad eyesight, but the older you get, your eyesight is never as good as that.
It's
ever.
like the jeweller's glass, isn't it?
Jeweller's glass. If
yeah.
you never mind pricking your finger with it, look at it through a jeweller's glass and you'll go,
Yeah.
The difference is sometimes the sharpened hook looks like the shard. A packet hook looks like a pyramid. And that is the difference between a bite and not a bite. I always use a little Nash finishing file. So even though I use sharpened hook, I just gently touch it up with that. And I always add a little bit of the point protector.
Yeah.
Whether you use point protector or
That's
Vaseline.
just for acidity, isn't it, Jules?
All waters are different. Some waters you can chuck them out and they can be out there for a day. The acidity of the water makes no difference. Other waters you chuck them out, wind back in an hour, and they rust.
Yeah.
And one thing I would add, but say, is that I've used sharpened hooks now for it'll be 10 years in 2025. I've never ever had a sharpened hook snap anywhere ever. It's a fallacy.
Yeah.
A sharpened hook, if there's one thing you can put in your fish in 2025, the finer the point, the more those pickups will convert to takes.
It's really took off over last 10 years sharpening hooks.
Jason Hayward and people like that, and the finer the point, I don't think anybody could argue that a finer point hook will prick more fish and land more fish in the long term.
There's just one point as well that I will say that, Jules, as well, that you brought up earlier. When you used to change your hooks in winter.
Yeah.
Now, I've actually found that point that sometimes, say if I'm zig fishing, can I say that? Well, I know a lot of people don't like zig fish. But when I've actually scaled down to a size 10 or 12 hook, the hook hold has been absolutely solid, mate.
Yeah. And it's not that they've gone, oh, that's a 5, I'm swimming away from it, because that 5 in comparison to that big bit of zig foam is nothing. It's just that the finer hook points prick more fish.
Yeah.
And catch more fish.
That's a very, very valid point. Very, very valid. So, if you had to choose, Jules, between, I'll put you on the spot here, mate.
Yeah.
Going straight out at packet or not out at packet, which would you do?
Not out the pocket. I would say the only time I don't use a sharpened hook is if I'm on a water that is full of nuisance fish. And I've caught roach and rub that are 1 or 2 ounces on a size 4 because the hook point is so fine they're pricking themselves. But I would say I'd put up with that. So if I had one hook to use for the rest of my life, it would be a hand sharpened 4 because you've got the fineness of the point of an 8, but
Yeah.
you've got the strength of a 4. So all for me, sharpened hook is always better.
So there's just, if you want to do it yourselves,
Yeah.
sharpening your hooks, obviously you just need your little files, your eyeglass, and using a little vice, can't you?
A
little
vice.
or some forceps.
Yeah.
Or you can go to Rig It Tackle and they'll...
Or buy a sharpened hook by whoever does hand sharpened hook. It's the biggest difference going.
yeah, and get it up. Jules, absolutely fantastic again, mate.
My pleasure.
Thank you.